Okay, quite often in the past, I've used the Dungeons and Dragons games as a teaching aid. I've in fact talked about how it's based on mythology and been able to use it as such. In this uh, form that we have here that I'm going to show you, it's kind of different, and it's an event that hasn't been on for like a year and a half or more. And it brought it back, but they nerfed things in it and stuff like that. But you can see that in this, I'm on a stance here instead as opposed to walking like I usually am. And I can change my stance, but it keeps making me, whenever I move, want to go into a different stance like this, where I'm flying with the blades or I'm using my arrows. Now, this whole area has been made out to look like a Dungeons and Dragons game board. In fact, they have an area that here's a swamp, and if I do touch it, you can see that I'm slowly taking damage, which they haven't upped this at all, but whenever the game first came out, that was kind of dangerous, and you didn't want to try to run all the way across that a couple of times or get caught in here or there. If you did, you could slowly burn up. It only took about 5 or 6 hits and you'd be gone. Now, it's not, though. You can see that they have giant mushrooms that are here, kind of a red topped mushroom, but I don't know if you noticed it over here, but there's a lot of these Amularia muscara mushrooms that are here. And those are the magic mushrooms that everybody's heard about, and the psychedelic mushrooms and everything, and so on. And I believe these ones over here are also another form of them that are back there. You can see there are rocks and little stalagmites put here. I don't know why there's no cave here, but there's a bunch of stalagmites in the water, things like that. Now, here's where the dungeon master stays in his little villa that's here, and that's inside of a giant sandworm's mouth, which is just like in Dune, but that's where that concept came from. There's some more mushrooms, there's some more mushrooms, there's some more mushrooms. Like I said, this is basically a gaming board here, and it has little games people can play on it during times, and like I could cue into this one. It's kind of like a carnival, and there's carnival sounds going on in the background. This one here you're trying to dodge. This one here you're trying to keep the dice from making it to this end before the timer goes out. This one here you're trying to do enough damage to reach up into the green, so on. This one here you have to do multiple target damage, so you have to put on your AoE or whatever and try to do multiple target damage and stuff. But if you haven't noticed yet, we're on a board and we're miniaturized. We are miniatures. All these are miniatures. And in fact, there's Portobello with Portobello's mitre on it, a mitre like a bishop would have on his hat and so on. And he's the one that runs the game right now. And there's the dice. You can see that we're in a room here, but also there's all the famed heroes that we cruise around with and have had encounters with through the whole thing. There's Bruenor, so they're all here. And if you look, each one of them has a advanced Dungeons and Dragons character sheet with stats and things on it, and it's upside down. I can't quite read it, whatever. 1 second damage. What are the gods really telling us? He has something that has a detection of 30 foot on it, probably an amulet, and he can detect orcs if they're within 30 foot or any of that type of stuff. So around the table, there are those that are our heroes. Let me cut across the water here. It's not really causing any damage anymore. There's also one where you have to beat up the dummies around here, and you have to collect all the cubes and stuff like that. There's another one where you have to do a race and go down through here, and of course you want to turn on your boon for movement speed if you've got it on your crew there to queue into it. But there's also 3 little dungeons, and one that everybody prefers on it because it's a little cooler than the other ones, and it's kind of like a obstacle course and so on. It has pendulum swinging axes and things like that in it, and bad guys and so on. So you can see these guys have done some of their rolls here and everything, and 3 on a 20-sided dice is not too good. 2, 1, 3, and then he had a 6. That's not real impressive either, and a 6 on a D8, depending on what we're talking about, could be bad. And that's what Dungeons and Dragons is it leaves it up to percentage chances. You can try to say what you're going to do, but there has to be some roll to say whether you're going to do it or not. And if I'm going to try to jump across something real big, I'd have to roll versus my dexterity with a 20-sided dice. And there might be modifiers to it, like, oh, this is a real tough jump, it's a -2 or a -3. But once you get across it, you can throw a rope, which is an easy task, back, and then you can get people to go across it. And i.e., you can build a bridge and then make this thing happen and get across. But there's also a fake drow that's here, but we do fight a drow in the dungeon and everything. This is a spider queen that's here. So most mythologies you've ever heard of have something to do with Dungeons and Dragons in a way, because Dungeons and Dragons has to do with most mythologies that you've ever heard of too, and they blend it into tales and stories and turn people into orcs and elves and those type of things. But I've also shown videos where orcs and Orkney Island and things like that, and also where elves come from, and El, the god of the Canaanites that everybody mulls over nowadays and tries to turn it into something radically different than what it was, but not to get religious or anything like that in this. But there's Dritz. He's a drow, gray eyes, and so on. And all these guys are playing the game that's here. But what's it got to do with mushrooms? Why are those always a part of it? Well, sure, there's little people and they live up under the mushrooms. And in this game, you go into giant places where it has giant mushrooms like this. And then there's people that are a little smaller than you are. You know, dwarves and halflings and stuff like that. Well, was that ever truth of things? Yeah, there was a time whenever people were barely 5 foot tall, and there was a group of people that were well over 6 foot tall. We found their burials and stuff, and it's different types of Caucasians, a mix of what we used to call Cro-Magnon man, and then others. And we are a blend and a variation of those people. But mushrooms also have been looked at as being a learning aid for people whenever they started having a higher register in their brains, and then would take these mushrooms and get off on it, and it would send them to something that was pretty much where they could see God, and a hallucination fits. But also along with that, a bunch of knowledge was gleaned on the way people look at things. If you've ever experienced any drugs like that in your life, whenever all of a sudden you get on it, you totally look at things differently sometimes and so on, from a totally different point of view. And that's kind of what Dungeons and Dragons, the game, does, is allows you to play from a third person with a group of people and so on. Yeah, Minsk is even here, but I don't see Boo, the space hamster. He again had some real terrible rolls. 3 on a D20, that's a miss. No wonder you're kind of depressed and looking down like, what can I do? But as you're doing this, the Dungeon Master will take you through stories and tales and everything and tell you what's going on. And quite often it's very much just like stories that you've heard. An easy one to remember that pretty much everyone has seen is Shrek, where there's a princess that is kept in a tallest tower and so on. But I've shown you where that actually has a lot of things in mythologies that people don't understand or don't know. Like, where's the talking donkey come from? Well, that actually comes from out of the Bible, from the ancient Canaanites and Belial, and they had this talking donkey. It was magic. It's in the book, but you don't hear that at Sunday school or anything even. They try to stick to the ones that are more believable or at least agreed upon. But there's also a tale that goes along with that. See, in the Tower of Babel, I just recently did a video on, or another one on, because the princess living in that tallest tower was Inanna. You know her as Venus and so on, but Inanna was the princess of heaven, or the queen of heaven, and you had to save her from the tallest tower, and she would become your queen. It's where all of that kind of idea comes from, and that was a ziggurat, and that, of course, goes along with the Tower of Babel. dwarves and miners and things like that. But I like the death worm that's here. We fight an actually robotic one. We get into the game where it actually involves space and stuff, like this guy right here and his radioactive space hamster. And it involves people from space. And I've even shown in one of my videos where you go up and you're on an asteroid over the Earth, and it looks like the Earth's been hit by something, and the moon's been hit again too. And that's actually telling of like the Younger Dryas event and what set us off, and where we have just some fleeting memories of mythologies that we carried on all the way through that time, and some of which actually come from much older than your biblical times or even later there. Even some of the Norse tales have been looked at and said, well, a good portion of that comes from a time before they even became the Norse people over here in Britain and the UK area where we know of them today. Some of this has been carried on for a long time. In fact, the flood is looked at as actually coming from the Younger Dryas event, although the Bible doesn't give a correct chronological order of people to where you can add it up to that, because it says 4000 BC. But that's also a telling of whenever these cities started to be rebuilt and born, and actually the only things that we knew of that were left. Until something like Göbekli Tepe showed up, or Catalhoyuk and these other places, and now we know that a lot of these places were before. And so it makes a little more sense in reality as to how that all went down and happened. Was there a fantastic thing that happened at that time? Yes. But there were fantastic things that happened before too, but also we blamed it on the gods whenever those went wrong, and whoa. That's a cool fireworm type of companion to have there for one of the guys that's here. So, not to bore you with all this if you aren't necessarily into it, but even if you're not into it, perhaps you can see where all this comes from and where you get the idea. And of course, it goes with great wars that happened in ancient times. And of course, in the Tolkien's idea, this was in a time before time. You know, it's always in a long time ago in a land far, far away, isn't it? Well, what made Star Wars special is that they were pulling off that idea and saying, well, you know, that same idea of a long time ago in a land far, far away, or a galaxy far, far away, had happened, and there was an advanced culture before, but something had happened. There's a lot of mythologies that go along with that too, and what we would almost call a modern mythology, where here's the secret cave where you can leave out of there. But in the actual real game, it would be that door over there, and you'd leave out of the man cave that's here that people play the game in. Yeah. And it's surrounded by animals and beasts and things like that, and a lot of just knick-knack things that are going to add up to the idea of where you're more immersed in the idea. Like I had all my D&D dice inside of a little bitty treasure chest that even had skulls on it and so on, and it was really for somebody to put their jewelry into, but instead it had all my dice and a bunch of little accoutrements and what my guys looked like and so on. And you try to keep up with it because you don't want to lose it or anything like that. But as you go through the game, things change, and you have to remember, you know, whenever you go through things, and try to remember that you used that rope and you did this, that, and the other, so you have to get it back, and you know, and that causes another thing, and it can even cause a whole nother quest and so on. But I just thought I would show this to you, that how this is, you know, the game's played, and now all of a sudden I'm being played as a game by this. I don't see myself up there, but I'm supposed to be playing under the guise of one of those. And how all these magic mushrooms had something to do with it. And even though you just think of that really as being something that shows up as, you know, around trolls and so on like that, I showed you before it went away recently, well, it was last year before it went away, whenever they redid Sherendar, which is a land of elves and so on, and hooked up along with that was these little guys known as Powries, and they're called red caps, and they wear little red Phrygian caps. But there's a little red cap on that mushroom too, and that place was full of magic mushrooms and some glowing mushrooms and all kinds of things that were in there that are kind of a different mythology. That's why I kind of lamented the idea of it going away, was because it's going to be different whenever they redid it, and sure it was. They took some of that stuff out of it and did some a little different to it, but that was another neat aspect. And indeed, every area here has its own thing and its own mythologies, and there's been blends and things put with it, and you know that story, so you have that idea, and whenever you go along through this, you kind of know the gist of how it's going to go. And if the dungeon master's good, he can set you to little twists in your game and make things difficult for you, but your party's able to figure it out and get through the quests and all that type of stuff. And it's real neat. Once you get through, you almost think that you could take and make a movie out of it, as I often did on some of our quests whenever I was a kid, and like Indiana Jones and so on. Or you could write a book about it, if you were eloquent enough to write a book about it, and some of the adventures that you had been through, just as if it was real. Like in Conan the Barbarian and stuff like that, you set yourself in that time, and it can really range from that time all the way up to the times and feeling of medieval ages and Robin Hood, and a blend of each. Anyhow, that's about enough for this one, and we'll get moving on. But again, this is a version of Dungeons and Dragons where it's kind of reversed on you here, and I thought I'd show you the aspect of it and what they have hooked up into it, and just a little overview of this. You do 2 of the quests each day and then 1 dungeon, and you get through this, and they give you leads to be able to buy things and stuff. I'll show you this just on the way out. So there's nothing to buy and everything. You can get refinement stuff, companion upgrade tokens, astral diamonds, but really you should probably steer away from that. Mount upgrade tokens if you need them, legendary stones of health, glyphs of potency, which you need, and each day you do this, you get 2 of each one, so it builds up. But also enchanting stones if you don't have enough to do that. Whenever you get your challenge, you can get all these, which are buffs, and you can even get preservation wards and a legendary insignia pack, which is nothing to snuff about if people are trying to get their powder to raise it all up. But then also you can get a golden warhorse, and they've added the beholder tank mount here, where it used to be a chance drop in the other one. People started jimmying it and knew how to go through and get one, so they turned it off. The Staldorf they've nerfed, and then now they've given it back to it to where you get 7.5%, or no, it's the Watler that they did that to. You can even get a coalescent monk to get you through this, the mythic bag of holding, and the Windsoul Ganassi, account bound companion to have. But right now people are actually mainly using a augmented companion, which whenever you get it, which is my little cub that's right here, owlbear cub, tiger striped Dakota, he gives you all of the stats to yourself. It's not a prompting thing and stuff, and it seems like you'll be able to do more damage that way than if you had an extra guy fighting for you and it took the edge back off of you for him. Anyhow, that's it for this video. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, and we'll get on to another piece of ancient knowledge.